Hey guys, it is Sunday, and we're glad you would join us on a Sunday. Appreciate you taking the time because, as usual, NPC has a lot of great information. So say hello, Mr. NPC 3.14.
Mini meows, folks. Hello.
We're going to talk about, well, we so much, but Mr. NPC is going to give us a lot of good information basically on the Jezebel spirit, but there's so much related to it. In fact, I was just telling Mr. NPC how I have been having, and I've told some of you guys this, and I've asked for prayers, but I've been having a lot more anxiety about going anywhere or being a part of anything because it's stressing me out what's going on, and then I get worried about our future and praying for more time. So this is the kind of time that helps me to come together with you guys and especially NPC and friends and talk about the truth of what God has planned for us, what really lies in our future, and there should be hope and rejoicing and preparedness. So, with that, take it away.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to remind everyone how. Pardon me, I was trying to move something. So, the prophecy is a fruit of the tree of life, as it were, and so the body of Christ yields these different fruits. And so, when we share things that we come across, this is in a sense like a pollination of things, and so that reveals new fruits of the Spirit for folks, you know. So whether that's making a connection in the Word or helping somebody discover their own gift and sharing it, I just think that it's important to share those things. So prophecy is supposed to give us hope, right? So we see a lot of these reoccurring themes used, and one of them is this idea of the Jezebel spirit. So what I wanted to do today is to talk a little bit more about that because we didn't get to go into as much depth the time before. But this is to be basically a counterfeit to the Holy Spirit, as it were. Now, what I've come across in the studies is that the Holy Spirit's actually identified as a male-type spirit, I think, from what I've been able to gather, even though it seems inherently feminine. But I think that that's why the Jezebel spirit, for instance, is maybe also characterized in this fashion as being a feminine, seductive type spirit of some sort, because it connects back to the Garden of Eden, it seems. So I'll take you on a little tour here of some stuff that we've come across just to kind of illustrate that. But let's start in 1 Kings here, just to kind of explain a little bit more about the person that was Jezebel, and then we'll get into the spirit side of things a little bit more, because we got to remember that she and her father both bore the name of Baal, and so that they're kind of these vessels for this spirit, as it were. And I wanted to, I'll talk about this also. So this is an alchemical cross here. And so this idea of alchemy and things, when they would incarnate kings and queens, they would try to do it at certain times when the stars and moons and planets were in certain orders. And, so this might be a perversion of the natural way things are supposed to be. But what would happen is the idea is that throughout the year, the starlight would enter the seed, and then if a child was produced at a certain time, they would incarnate this ruler. So I think that in the case with Jezebel, as we'll read, we're going to see that she is kind of, in a feminine sense anyway, the incarnation of this Nephilim type ruler attitude, spirit, that seems to come back time and again. And so what I've also noticed is some of these monuments, like the pyramids of Giza, for instance, they're at a fixed star. They have to be, they only work with certain fixed stars. So like the ones in Orion, for instance, match up with the pyramids of Giza. So whenever they wanted their ruler past
Actually,
Khufu.
that the Orion's belt matches up with multiple pyramids all over the world.
Oh, well, Okay, I'm not really surprised then. That actually makes a lot more sense. So now
Mm-hmm.
here's an interesting thing about that, because the story behind Orion is that he's chasing the Pleiadian seven sisters, right? And so we can find this connection then also in the story of Solomon, when he's talking to the spirit of seven sisters, and the last one is the one with a mystery name, and she predicts his downfall when he worships foreign gods. In this case, it was Moloch, by sacrificing some locusts. So I wanted to also mention before I forget, one of the things that occurred to me was that, when we think about these, the universe, the one song, the word, and how all these different creations all play a different part in the ensemble of the symphony, right? It also occurred to me how an orchestra has a pit, right? So I just wanted to also kind of take this all into the direction and to revelation of how this fits into that also, because this spirit will in fact have dominion and have the ability to control others, I think. And so I'll mention about Apollonius of Tyana a little bit as well, and how that kind of maybe relates to this in such a way as well. So that's how it might sound today. So anyway, let's get into reading this here. 1 Kings 16. And let me make sure. I wanted to find the part that I was going to read and not have to read the entire chapter. Maybe it was. Well, I guess I have a different 1 Kings article up. So I must have been talking about something else right here. I'm sorry. Anyway, what this is about here is I'm sorry, I don't know why I have this one up. I thought this was about the Jezebel. Sorry.
That's okay.
Anyway, I'll talk about this right here instead, because this link's already.
Well, because it says right here to go to that
1
verse.
Kings 22. So which one did I have up here?
And 29 I saw.
16. Okay, well. All right. So anyway, this talks about it right here.
This talks about 1 Kings 16, 29 to 34, rivalry between Yahweh and Baal. But anyway, Ben, why?
Well, in this article here, kind of encapsulates it a little better than I could anyway. So I'll just read this. So it says here that Jezebel was a Phoenician princess married to Ahab, king of Israel, as I mentioned before on the last episode. So she lived in dangerous times, it says. There was open war between the followers of Yahweh and Baal. So we see here that Baal was considered a rain god and also a storm god. So he's often depicted with lightning bolts, right? So we knew that it characterizes Lucifer's fall from heaven as falling as a bolt of lightning, right? So we got to remember that the Jezebel spirit is connected to that kind of imagery, and that the prophet Elijah was supporting Yahweh, and that at the time Jezebel was actually having all the prophets martyred, right? So this is another theme we see reoccurring in Revelation, is that she becomes drunk with the blood of saints, right? And then as revenge, Elijah then slays all of the prophets of Baal. So we see that also happen in Revelation, but on a very grand scale, as it were, with what's known as the Whore of Babylon. So she's representing the Whore of Babylon in this context. And so then we see here that Jezebel's husband, Ahab, tries to steer a middle course, urging tolerance between the two groups. So we see again in Revelations where it talks about, if you're neither hot or cold, but lukewarm, will spit you out. This is where we see that Ahab is this weak king that he's always trying to please everybody, and he's a fence sitter, in other words. So he represents this kind of archetype, I guess. And then we see here that in the story of Naboth's vineyard, the parable of the vineyard once again becomes highlighted, and that Jezebel usurps dominion over this vineyard that is not rightfully hers. And because Ahab he could have taken it by force, but he, again, was nice, didn't want to do that, but then let his wife, Jezebel, make the arrangements as such that they ended up getting the land. And not only that, but I think the man is murdered. Yes. So he wouldn't sell the vineyard, and so she arranged for the death of Naboth, so the ownership of the vineyard passed to Ahab. Yes. So this is where I wanted to read about in the First Kings portion, was to encapsulate this again. And then here's where we learn also that Jezebel and all of her family members were killed during a palace coup d'etat led by a soldier named Jehu. She was cornered in her own palace, thrown down from the balcony, and eaten by dogs. Nevertheless, she died with courage, royally dressed as a queen and priestess of Baal. So again, when Revelations talks about her being adorned in jewels and emeralds and things like that, having a golden cup, right? This is to be indicative of that type of thing too. So having plenty to the point of excess and not sharing it with those less fortunate would be a really good example of that, a gluttony type thing, which the 7 deadly sins, as it were, kind of correlate again to these 7 sisters that appeared to Solomon. Anyway, I'm going to continue here. So I don't think we got quite this far last time. So this will help.
I don't think we got this far at all. I'm not sure we really touched on much of this at all.
Well, we kind of rushed through things, so I didn't want to get... Anyway, so
if you notice here,
this is said to maybe have belonged to Jezebel. But if you notice here, this is the cat woman type figure. And so if we refer again to Revelation 12, where the sign in heaven was a woman clothed in the sun with the moon at her feet, crowned with 12 stars and travailing in birth. Well, this time that we're in right now, actually, is this woman cat period of time where the spirit here, it can become with child, right? And so we go back 3.5 years, which was about, we're not quite to the 1260-day period in Revelation, but we're approaching that, which could be March, right? So not to give feelings of anxiety to people, but that's why we're told about prophecies, is to be prepared, because it's not until the abomination of desolation occurs that we're told to flee into the mountains, right? So that's the thing we should be looking for if we're waiting for that. But that said, because of what happens in Revelation 12 and that being fulfilled, and a lot of folks have the opinion that it's been fulfilled since September 23rd, 2017, when Virgo had the moon at her feet. And then, of course, Mercury, Mars, and Venus, I think, were in Leo, adding 3 to the 9, making 12 stars. And then, of course, had Jupiter in retrograde for 4.5 months, coming back through, then passing through the legs on that day. So that's where folks think that was fulfilled. And so yet, imagine the Sphinx then being pregnant, right? And so what the Sphinx is also associated with is the annual flooding of the Nile. So again, when we see birth associated with flood, I think that the Sphinx may in fact be somehow connected to all the imagery. And so we're going to read here that, I just wanted to mention that because of what it says here about this maybe being her seal. Jezebel was the daughter of the king in the rich coastal city-state of Sidon. Her people, the Phoenicians, were like a contemporary of the Israelites because they're trading partners, were cosmopolitan and sophisticated, and they controlled large areas of the eastern Mediterranean. When Jezebel was old enough, a marriage was arranged for her with Ahab, king of Israel. So we see this was not a marriage of love, but of arrangement and convenience. He, Ahab, took as his wife Jezebel, daughter of King Eth-and-Baal of the Sidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. So we see that this is, if you go back to Father Malachi and some of the things that he's done, like on Coast to Coast, for instance, when he talks about possession, there's certain degrees of oppression and possession. And when he talks about the concept he calls perfect possession, that's when it's passed on to progeny, right? So we see that this is a concept that's very well illustrated here with how they were doing things in their royal line, is that not only were they trying to keep the genetics in such a way pure in their mind, but also their practices allowed for that spirit to commune with them more closely. So the reason I'm highlighting this is because this is why we're supposed to keep the Lord's days holy, right? And so we should seek after the Lord's feast days, for instance. And this is really what the menorah stands for with each of the 7 candlesticks. So since we're approaching the end of the harvest season, which is right now, which is also why cats became so popular as domestic animals, because they helped protect the grain from rodents and such, right? So anyway, as we're moving into this time, into the fall, this is when we're going to see the Feast of the Trumpets, Atonement, and then I think we move into Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. So these are very important days that some people say is when Christ was born. So
I think that he was born on September 11th.
That's what a lot of folks seem to think. So now that you mention that, if you really think about that, then Revelation 9:11 is quite revealing then. Because some folks seem to think that that could have a corollary to the text where Jesus comes with judgment, right? So, but hurting not those with the seal of God in their foreheads. And so I think that's very interesting to compare those texts. Anyway, let's continue here before I get off topic. What sort of person was Jezebel? As well as being rulers, Jezebel's parents were high priests in the worship of Baal. Jezebel herself was probably a priestess of Baal. She was trained to lead and to command. Now, one of these well-known celebrations of these pagan gods in a lot of cases were these high priestesses that were female. Sometimes they would have these rituals that were basically like they considered them a holy harlot or something like that, and having sex with them was meant to kind of purify or cleanse you. That didn't necessarily always mean to the completion, to actually have a child, although that could probably happen in a lot of cases. But it was just meant to have some type of ritual. So we see here that she could have been involved in that kind of thing. So she might have been not a virgin, or was at least trained in certain things, but maybe still a virgin because she was married. Anyway, as far as ordinary people were concerned, the ancient gods were all around in a daily experience. So this is very pantheistic and animistic. They were not remote or invisible. They were easy to identify with since they reflected humanity. A lot of the times we see Greek gods and goddesses reflecting parts of our human selves, right? That's what they're trying to say here. Anthropomorphism, for instance, seeing faces and things and likenesses to animals. The clouds and goddesses did all these things that people do. They got angry, fell in love, quarreled with their families, and generally expressed what was best and worst in human nature. So a lot of times you see extremes in these characters. And so, in contrast to what the Israelites believed, this was many of the people in the northern province of Israel shared her beliefs. They worshiped a number of gods, including Yahweh, Baal, and Asherah, which Asherah is known as the queen of heaven. So what we often see is Baal as a consort to Asherah. And in the Sumerian context, this is even mother and son, but also being lovers in that way too. With the father being slain, like an Oedipus Rex kind of archetype. But others believed that they could give loyalty to only one God, and that this God was Yahweh. The worshippers of Yahweh were the ones who wrote the story, and of course they tell the story to emphasize the power of their own God Yahweh as the overcomer of this, of course, because she's oppressing. Sometime during Ahab's reign, there was a terrible drought throughout Israel and Judah. It is hard for a modern person to appreciate what drought means to these people, because none of us are likely to die as a result of famine. To ancient people, it was a different matter. As food grew scarce, the old and very young began to die, then the adults, until only the young, strong adults were left. This is very much similar to the 40 years spent in the desert, right? This was the situation in Jezebel's kingdom at the time. As the drought worsened, so did the desperation of the people. Every kind of prayer was made to the gods, to any god who would listen. A contest developed between people who worshipped Baal and those who worshipped Yahweh. It was a contest that would end with the death of many people.
Kind of sounds like what we're about to go through. I feel like that might be something.
That's exactly why I'm talking about this, because it just struck me how similar this really all was. Then Elijah said to the, I'll quote from 1 Kings 18:17 through 40. It's not all that, though. But then Elijah said to the people, I, even I only, am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets number 450. Let 2 bulls be given to us. Let them choose 1 bull for themselves, cut into pieces, and lay it on the wood, but put no fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood, but put no fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. Notice, if you're seeing the screen, Lord's capitalized in this case to represent an actual name of God, not Baal, which also means Lord in lowercase. The God who answers by fire is indeed God, as we see here, uppercase, God, but not Lord, as it just said in the previous sentence. So again, they're using the name of God here. All the people answered, well spoken. So, yeah, we see a contest here. And this is a great time to mention what I was wanting to bring up about the red heifer, and how I think that this kind of really highlights this whole Jezebel spirit story, because she's basically who brings this kind of thing to fruition. And so what we're seeing now is that the red heifer, they are cultivating these extinct red heifers, and so they're not even supposed to exist in the first place. And because since the peoples were scattered in 70 AD, they lost, of course, their cow, and so the only way they could be cleansed is by the ash of this red heifer mixed with spring water, right? And so I think that, again, why I wanted to highlight this Jezebel spirit thing is because now we're seeing the red heifer come back when it shouldn't even be. So it's almost like when we look at the transgressions of the days in Noah's time with the DNA and what they were doing then, I honestly, I don't want to come out and just make the claim, but my intuition tells me that this could be the abomination of desolation, because it's using a substitute for a substitute. Because the red heifer was only to represent atonement to begin with, which Jesus Christ was the blood that came to replace that mark on the forehead, which would have normally made of ash, right? So with them bringing this back, I kind of see that as their attempt to materialize the temple of the Holy Spirit, where we are already the temple. And of course, they have the country that is Israel, without realizing that the body of Christ is that temple, that nation. So that's what this picture here also kind of represents, is the body of Christ. And of course, it's a vegetable type kingdom, as it's a tree, right? This is a tree of life. Now, a lot of these actually correspond to planets and stuff too. So if anybody wants this image, I can share it with them. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that real quick, and before we got back into this. So what we're seeing right now is that they have all the vestments for the temple, and now a red heifer that they're counting the hairs of. If it has less than 2 white hairs, it is considered clean enough to be sacrificed, even though it's not going to technically be the same red heifer from the times before. So I think that when this red heifer's sacrificed at the temple, this is something to watch for. Now, here's the real interesting thing to watch for. The first tabernacle was a tent, not an actual physical, constructed. It was meant to be moved.
Right.
So we got to really pay attention to this, because they could very well set a tent up in a day, and start pulling some of this stuff off. So I just really wanted to mention this, because that's something that you see folks, watchmen, talking about this stuff back in May, with Rabbi, I think Ariel, can't recall his last name, but which Ariel, by the way, is a lower spirit, a name of a hierarchical lower spirit, by the way. But anyway, that guy has been trying to breed these cattle for a while, and so it wasn't until this month that we had the birth of one that they felt would be a candidate, and so they've been counting the hairs on it. So I don't know who has that task of counting all the hairs.
I was wondering that myself, and I'm like, how would they be so sure too? But I mean, who knows?
Well, that's the whole point. And so but I think that's one of the, and see, that's why it's interesting to bring these things up, because it talks about God knowing every hair on your head, things like that. Well, I think it's making references to stuff like this that we just kind of miss, because, well, when was the last time they were counting heifer hairs?
Right.
So I think it brings things into that and the question. And since Jesus was, in fact, the culmination of this ultimate sacrifice, that's, the temple was no longer needed. There were no longer sacrifices to be necessary. But this also makes it very interesting, because then we see the figure that causes the sacrifices to stop. But they characterize that person as the what they call the Antichrist. So I'm not yet sure how that plays in, but here we go. Then
well, if I could just give my input really quick on that, I would think it'd be like somebody pretending, because I think the Antichrist will pretend to be the first Messiah for many, obviously. And so that he'll come and go, no, it's no longer necessary, kind of like Jesus did. It'll just be a hijacking, corrupt version.
Oh, I see. Maybe they won't be on the same team as it seems. You know what I mean?
Like, hey, it's okay. We can stop all this now, guys. I'm here.
Well, okay, because apparently a lot of this seems to be that they're trying to force God's hand by doing things they know that will make him angry. So this could be part of that, honestly. But anyway, not that was Jezebel's intention at the time. I don't think that she actually was trying to invoke God's wrath. But let's continue here. So in 1 Kings 19, 1-3, it says, Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, So may the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life like the life of one of them by this time tomorrow. Then he was afraid, and he got up and fled for his life. So just like it's saying here, he told Elijah, he's like, she sent a messenger to Elijah, kind of telling him to, get up and go, right? But what we see here is that Elijah knew that Jezebel would make a fearsome enemy, so he fled. Well, this is just like whenever the abomination and desolation occurs in the holy place, it tells us to flee, right? Because then she's coming to become drunk with the blood of the saints. So again, another little parallel that seems to connect with Revelation, right? It says to go to the hills. 1 Kings 21, 1-16. During their 20-year reign, Jezebel and Ahab built a new capital city at Samaria. So we see Samaria brought up in the parable at the well with Jesus and the Samaritan, the woman. Among other things, it contained an opulent palace and a temple to Baal and Asherah, again, the consort couple. The palace was a 2-story building surrounding a grand ceremonial courtyard. It was called the Ivory House because of the number of carved ivory decorations on its walls and furniture. Archaeologists have dug up many ivory plaques that decorated the walls and furniture. A second royal house was built near Jezreel. Actually, I think that might come up again in Revelation, the Valley of Jezreel. It was a villa overlooking rolling hills and lush vineyards. Jezreel stood in a commanding position looking over the lush valley of Jezreel. Ah, yeah, that's the way I remembered it. Near the valley at Jezreel was the vineyard of Naboth. Ahab needed to amalgamate this land into the land he owned by the royal villa to grow crops to feed the administrative and military staff living there, because each of these feasts actually have certain prescribed things that are needed. So you'd also need lots of land to be in accordance with these things. He made a fair offer to Naboth, but Naboth did not wish to sell. There was a long-standing tradition that inherited property should not be sold to anyone outside the family if it had been continuously occupied by the one family since the settlement of Canaan. Naboth held stubbornly to this tradition, defying the king. He, Ahab, lay down on his bed, turned away his face, and would not eat. His wife Jezebel came to him and said, "Why are you so depressed that you will not eat?" He said to her, "Because I spoke to Naboth the Jezreelite, and he said to him, 'Give me your vineyard for money, or else, if you prefer, I will give you another vineyard for it.' But he answered, 'I will not give you my vineyard.' His wife Jezebel said unto him, 'Do you not govern Israel? Get up, eat some food, and be cheerful. I will give you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite.'" Ahab was an Israelite, and he understood Naboth's reasoning. He also understood that the Israelite kings did not have unlimited power, as kings in surrounding countries had. Again, we see how he's desiring to be like the kings of other lands, right? Not like the one spiritual king. Jezebel, on the other hand, came from Sidon, where her royal parents had unlimited power. She was scornful of the way Ahab has let his own subjects get the better of him, which actually also brought with it respect. And so this is kind of Machiavellian when we talk about, would you rather have love or fear of your subjects, right? Well, we can see that Jezebel would clearly prefer to have fear. Yes. Okay, so we continue on with 1 Kings 21, 1 through 16. The key to Jezebel's character is that she behaved like a Phoenician princess, not like an Israelite woman, in contrast to Judith. Would be a good parallel here, I think. She believed the monarch had absolute power and was contemptuous of the limitations that the traditional Hebrew law put on her. Like other Middle Eastern monarchs at the time, she believed that the ruler of a kingdom made the law. And so, again, we see another parallel is that the rule of law is by which something is measured, right? A lot of times this was the length from the elbow to the tip of the finger or something like that. They would have some type of standard for how they would. So each time there was a new ruler, there was a new standard of measure, right? Also, they had a rod to measure with, but also that's to plant with too, in some cases. Such as the seasons and the times. Jezebel took matters into her own hands. She had Naboth and his sons accused of treason on false evidence, and they were duly convicted and executed. So again, using the law to kill somebody that's innocent, right? We see another cycle repeating here. The vineyard, being the property of convicted traitors, reverted to a state of ownership. Ahab had his vineyard finally, at the cost of blood. So we see another parallel here with blood and wine. Jezebel and her family is then finally murdered. So 1 Kings 22, 29 through 40, and 2 Kings 9, 21 through 28, and then again 9, 30 through 37. Ahab, husband of Jezebel, spent a good part of his reign fighting on the battlefield. For information about Ahab and his father, the legendary Omri, you can see a link here about the top 10 warriors of the Bible.
Yeah, can you link this in the chat real quick, or are you able to do that?
You know, I actually forgot that I even had the chat up. If you give me just a second.
I can't pull the chat up, just to let everybody know. I'm in the chat. Yeah, I'm just letting everybody know. I'm in the chat as my other account, the No Peace Cerebral account, because I can't open the chat and see Skype at the same time. It's making Skype go white. It's really weird. So I'm in the chat on my other account on my phone.
I'm assuming I'm in the chat.
You are. I just saw it. I'm just letting everyone else know that that's why I'm on my Noel P-Cerebral account, because I have that open on my phone. I can't open the chat. For some reason, it just makes the whole Skype page turn white, and I can't see what you're doing. So I just had to close the chat on the
It's
computer.
fine. That's when I went ahead and opened it here. I just forgot that it was there. Anyway, Ahab made a military alliance with Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah. So I think, again, when in Revelation, when it talks about the political alliance of peace and how we see a bad Abaddon coming and making peace with Israel here, and this Jezebel spirit trying to steal the vineyard, all these motifs kind of coming to a nexus point here. So Ahab made a military alliance with Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah. Together they warred against the king of Aram to gain territory that had been they claimed as their own. In the battle between the two armies, Ahab disguised himself so that the opposing army would not concentrate their attack on him. Depending on your point of view, Ahab acted either in cunning or cowardly way. In any event, he was mortally wounded in battle. But a certain man drew his bow and unknowingly struck the king of Israel between the scale armor and the breastplate, so that he said to the driver of his chariot, "Turn around and carry me out of battle, for I am wounded." Reference here is 1 Kings 22, 29 through 40. In the aftermath of the battle, the prophecy of Elijah in 1 Kings 21, 19 came true. Ahab had fallen and died in his chariot. His blood seeped over the boards of the chariot floor, and when he had been taken back to Samaria, some dogs licked at the blood before the chariot could be washed. So that's referring to the
dogs again. I wonder, do you know what that means to have, like, she gets eaten by dogs and then his blood licked up by dogs?
Well, just like here, it says hunting dogs could bring down a lion. They were trained to work independent of their handlers, so they were difficult to control, maybe representing modes of chaos. On the other hand, dogs were bred to shepherd animals and were chosen for their ability to work under direction, so it was easier to teach them restraint. So it's almost as if these, I kind of see angels as almost dog-like, dogmatic, if you will, and that they have terrible ferocity and are capable of all this stuff. But if they show up and they're not supposed to hurt you, they're not going to. Also, this is very interesting too when you compare it to the Revelation 9 text, in that the locusts from the pit are also giving directives and restraint, and that they're not able to harm certain folks. So the sheep that are part of the shepherd work, as it were. So I don't know. I think it's really interesting to think about it. But you can also find mentions of the Cephalophali, I think they're called, the dog-headed men. It's something quite interesting to read about. There's all these historical accounts of what they call the dog-headed men. And it's kind of funny to think about, because you just imagine a dog head on a man, but it wasn't quite that pronounced, I guess. But they did, I guess, somehow resemble dogmen. So it makes you wonder about these characters from like Egyptian,
right? Exactly.
Or Nubis.
I was going to say Gary Wayne could probably talk to us about that.
Yeah, we really ought to ask him about the cryptids of that sort. But at any rate, I've even seen some frescoes or mosaics of Jesus standing amidst 4 dogmen, all bearing spears. So, of course, it may not be any coincidence that dog and God are composed of the same letters. And then, in fact, I think, isn't the Orion constellation the one with Sirius in it? Is that the dog star? So, yeah, there could be several different things here that we don't quite understand. And then, of course, the hounds of hell. Cerberus guards the gate to hell. So, again, another parallel to the pit here, perhaps. Also, the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, he speaks of hounds that pursue those in the barriers. And so folks that are trying to get outside their mortal shell and travel in the other dimensions, apparently there are these hounds there as well. And they'll go after you. And that is the prelude to that are the sound of bells, by the way, or a baying, a howl. That's just the stuff I've read. Anyway, more to the point here. So Ahab was succeeded by his son Ahaziah, who lasted only 2 years. He was injured in a fall that may or may not have been a bizarre accident and died soon after. His brother Joram then became king. Both of these young men were sons of Jezebel. So we see her sons didn't really get to have a long-lasting dynasty. Her seed was kind of stamped out. Who was Jehu, murderer of Jezebel? So this particular gentleman is he's an ambitious army officer favored by the prophet Elisha, not Elijah. And again, there's this story, it goes back to when he's plowing with an ox, I believe, and he's asked to come along, and he just leaves and goes right then. Who anointed Jehu as king?
You mean Elijah, when he's...
Yeah. That's
Elijah and Elisha, however you want to say it. Elisha and Elijah were together, and he's like Enoch, taken without death.
Yeah, and he's also given a cloak of authority. Excuse me here. Who anointed Jehu as king? Yeah, because he had that mantle, so he was able to do this kind of thing. Who anointed Jehu as king even while the reigning King Joram of Israel still lived. Jehu planned a coup d'etat against the dynasty of Ahab. He saw his chance when King Joram was wounded in a battle against the Arameans. Joram went to the walled villa at Jezreel to recover from his wounds, and there he was visited by King Ahaziah of Judea. Jehu, excuse me, I'm getting tongue-tied. Jehu set a trap for the young kings, luring them out of the safety of the walls of Jezreel, and then murdered them both. So again, we see the seed is stamped out. Jezebel, standing on the watchtower at Jezreel, watched it all. So she was forced to see this, just as the Nephilim have to watch their seed being slain. The slaughter did not stop there. The successes of Jehu's coup depended on the death of every member of the royal family. Jehu continued on to Jezreel, and his soldiers broke through the villa's defenses. So if you really see this death of Jezebel here in context, this is kind of prophesied also in Revelation as the destruction of Babylon, Mystery Babylon, the nameless seventh sister. And if it follows the same mode, it should be a Baal and Asherah combination. When Jezebel heard that what had happened to her son, she knew immediately what lay in store for her. She did not flinch for a moment. She dressed herself in full regalia as a queen, with the ornate ritual makeup and headdress of priestess of Baal and Asherah. Painting one's face, more than a fashion statement than for queens and priestesses like Jezebel, says here that ritual makeup denoted separation from the ordinary and an elevation to a higher state of being. As such, for a queen, it was a badge of office, showing her rank and her separation from common people. This is more of a pride thing, if you will. Jezebel went out into the balcony of the courtyard to face Jehu. As he approached, she called him Zimri, the name of a murderer and usurper of a previous king. She accused him of murdering his anointed king. When Jehu came to Jezreel, Jezebel heard of it. She painted her eyes and adorned her head and looked out the window. As Jehu entered the gate, she said, "It is peace, Zimri, murderer of your master." He looked up to the window and said, "Who is on my side? Who?" 2 or 3 eunuchs looked at him. He said, "Throw her down." So they threw her down. So we see here that even her own servants didn't, serve her.
Kind of like Ellen. All her employees hate her. Ellen DeGeneres.
And it says here that some of her blood splattered on the wall and on the horses which trampled upon her. Then Jehu went in and drank. Went in and ate and drank. So we see here this didn't bother his conscience at all. He said, "See to it that the cursed woman, that see to that the cursed woman and bury her, for she is a king's daughter. But when they came to bury her, they found no more of her than the skull and feet and palms of her hands. She had been devoured.
Yuck. Hey, real quick, Hubu Jones says, I think Sirius is in Lupus, the wounded dog at the tail of Scorpio, one of the brightest stars in the southern sky. Dog is Caleb, or Caleb in Hebrew, means all heart.
Oh, interesting. So very loyal. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Wounded dog in the tail of Scorpio. So that could. I'm glad I brought that up. The link. We can go back to that because this could help shine a little bit of light on the scorpion tail being possibly associated with the creatures of the pit. If you go back to this Akkadian tale here, the first ancient empire, Mesopotamia, centered in the city of Akkad. The surrounding region, they spoke Sumerian. And so we're going to talk a little bit here about these scorpion creatures real fast before I forget. I didn't really know how to make the connection yet, but that might help. There. Oh, I expected it to be a little easier to find, but this article will have it's got the name of the, there's a certain name for these scorpion creature type entities that I think are kind of what they're talking about with the pit. Anyway, sorry, I forgot. I must have opened the wrong link when I was looking for it earlier. But anyway, I'll drop this here in the chat. If you can find the name of these creatures, maybe type them out. That's what I was looking for. I just can't remember the name of them. Anyway, let's go back to this right here. So it says here that Jezebel died as a queen, should be magnificent and defiant, hurling insults at her murderers to the last moment of her life. Jehu let marauding dogs eat her flesh so that there was nothing left to bury, etc. Then he murdered every one of the male children of her family, about 70 in all, ordering that their severed heads be sent to him in baskets. Well, but we also see that in the book of Amos, I think it is, there's two baskets presented at the top of the temple steps, right? And the Lord asks him, what do you see? And he says, figs, right? Fruit. We also see that this is kind of mentioned in Revelation as well, with says Christians are supposed to lose their heads, etc. So again, another parallel here with heads and fruit and baskets. And
I guess that's why they were bringing the guillotines in for us.
Yes, exactly. I don't like to talk about it because I figure I scare people enough as it is. But yes, you're right. That's where I was going with that.
We're not trying to scare anyone. We're just trying to prepare everyone, and that's a conversation that NPC and I had earlier. That we shouldn't let fear creep in heavier than the prepared side. And you said that to me. You said, "Aren't you glad that you knew these things? You would rather know these things than to be caught unaware."
I'm just trying to, I can still. Anyway, so yes, the fruits. It's a great parallel right there with this baskets here that we see. And so again, I think that's in Amos. But again, this will come back to the parable of the fig. But then also we look in Genesis where after they ate from the tree, they sowed fig leaves. So again, I think the fig symbolism should really be paid attention to here. All right. And the possibility that wasps in this regard could also represent these creatures that I was trying to talk about the Akkadian scorpion creatures that I can't remember the name of. Could also relate to these wasps in some way. Now, again, with that wasp, it is dissolved inside the fig. So once a flower is pollinated by the wasp, They crawl into that fig blossom, and they lose their wings when they crawl in, and then they're dissolved into the fig. And so by the time it fruits, they're reborn as an entirely new species, if you were, like they're melded into it. So that's kind of what this also represents in a sense. I just wanted to show that again. Let me go back to this. So Jezebel, who's who? Jezebel means, where is the prince? I did not know that. So the fertility god Baal, favorite deity of Phoenicia, Jezebel's original homeland, Baal was in the land of the dead in winter. That's very interesting. So his followers could chant, where is the prince, to encourage the return of spring. Jezebel was unflinchingly loyal to Baal and went to her death wearing the ritual makeup and headdress of the priestess of Baal. Ahab, Jezebel's husband, Ahab means brother of the father. Ahab's father was a famous warrior, and Ahab lived in his shadow. Elijah the prophet, his name means, my God is Yah. There was no room for negotiation in Elijah's nature. He worshipped Yahweh with his whole being. Jehu, the opportunist usurper who murdered Jezebel. Jehu means it is he, Yah. It's very much like Elijah. And the main themes of this Jezebel story is the murderous conflict between the priests of Yahweh and the priests of Baal and his consort of Shira, which in this case, consort of Yahweh would be more like the Holy Spirit, I guess, in a sense, if you wanted to kind of draw the other parallels. But political conflict is another thing here with the kingship, and one that they don't mention here, of course, is about the vineyard. So again, the parallels of the parable of the vineyard and the fruit and the baskets. Again, with weddings and travail, you would typically have the firstborn from a union, your honeymoon, right? And so typically a bride has a train on the back of her dress also. So just like we're seeing here, like Jezebel's all adorned, right, in all of her regalia. Much like she would be if she were getting married, right? But not a celebration of life and celebration of death. But anyway, that kind of concluded this article here on Jezebel. So I just wanted to highlight a few things about how related to Revelation, and that we see that this spirit is supposed to be part of this deception that occurs. And so it's meant to be very strong and convincing. And in this case, we see that, Baal was a fertility god of the crops and stuff. So they were trying to basically replace God with nature, in a sense, and I also find
like
it kind of
the New Agers
interesting.
do.
Well, and if we also look at it, they didn't really plan for the future, right? So they were just always looking forward to spring. Whereas the people that followed the Lord were often those that were conservative and, got ready for winter. But another parallel I wanted to draw is that once Babylon is destroyed, there are those that mourn for her, right? And they anoint their head with ash and wail and carry on. These funeral rites do actually kind of highlight some more parallels. And we see this as well with Sodom and Gomorrah, when Lot and his wife and his children were leaving, and his wife turned around and looked and turned into a pillar of salt, right? So she was mourning for the Babylon in that way. So it's just a reminder, folks, to not mourn the way things were, because the new normal, there's a big price to pay for that new normal. And honestly, don't think any true Christian would want to live in the world that may be coming, if that's the new normal. But just highlighting some of these things helps it to become a little more apparent, I think. So I wanted to kind of revisit that and just explain how this also similar to the fig in Matthew 24:32 when he's talking about do not eat of this tree. So there's certain things that these folks did in their society which were in line with different gods. They had different feast days. They gave adoration to God on unclean days, things of that nature. And so, again, why I think one of the first things we should do is to try and learn what these days really are and why they're important. And I actually have a link up on a little tablet device here. I don't have it on the computer, so if you bear with me for a moment, I would like to read about the feast days real quick. The biblical calendar and the biblical feasts. I think I actually sent this.
You sent it to me. Yeah, it's right in there in Discord.
Okay, cool. Well, I think I have the screen shared right now. But anyway, let me read about this real quick. People have invented many calendars, but there's only one calendar for God. This is described in detail in the Bible. The sun, the moon, and the stars were created not only to give us lights, but also to determine time correctly. God's calendar is sensational because it connects nature with time. It combines the sun, the moon, the harvest times, and all of nature into harmonious unity. As I said, the universe, right? Just amazing and brilliant. This will also be a calendar in the millennium. So it continues here to describe how the illustration above shows the dates of the first biblical feast days in 2020, according to today's Hebrew calendar. And then they give the Gregorian date. So let me find the actual dates here. Okay, so...
Do you want to drop that link in the chat?
I don't have it directly here.
I can do it. I gotta open it though, but go ahead.
Oh, okay. I did send it. So I sent it twice. Sorry. So let me go back to the link here.
I got it.
And thank you. There's like a picture after the first paragraph. That's the one. The blue is showing the harvest and feast days, and then the red is the Gregorian days. So one of the things that became apparent to me about this is that the Levite priests, one of their main tasks was to blow the horn when the first sliver of the moon became visible at night. So you got to remember these folks went on a lunar calendar, and so they were starting their feast days at certain intervals. Well, this didn't line up with the prevailing culture, and so think of it this way: as like there was those that worshiped the sun, in a sense, because of the fertility aspects of Baal, right? But then the Israelites had their own calendar that was given to them by their God, and he too governed their agriculture, but had more power, whereas this particular god, Baal, was just maybe had aspects. I'm not saying he wasn't real or didn't have maybe some demon, But anyway, here are the holidays. So the Jewish calendar was established by Patriarch Hillel II in the year 359 AD, for this one that we're looking at here. And said on the basis of the calendar, now everybody knew in advance which month has 29 and which has 30. And when in respect to the holidays or feasts are Passover, which that's the Shavuot, which is in May, I think. Yom Teruah, which I think we just had that in June. And then we got there's a summer harvest interval where there's nothing, I believe. And then in Yom Kippur, which is coming up very soon, and Sukkot, this made it possible for the first time for all Jews scattered all over the world and to have the same feast days, and then they could calculate them long in advance. So I guess they could gather together and things like that. Thus, this calendar has several errors, but we must not criticize for this. See, there we go, where they even admit that there's some errors. And so what happens is these little errors that get made over time, that builds up, and there's some folks that share about this on YouTube. I found a guy named Nick Vanderlaan, for instance. He talks a lot about the calendars that were established, like in the Book of Enoch, for instance, and why those were so important. Because it says that in the end days that the seasons will be confused, and that the Antichrist spirit will seek to change the times, for instance. So what we really come to understand with that, I think, is that the Sabbath days begun to become unclean because they're not even real. It's not the real Sabbath. We just think it is. See what I mean? So some of these feast days even start to be on like wrong days, or even in the worst case, on the feast day of a competing god, for instance. So I think part of the stuff that we see happen with the time of Revelation is to also be shown again, like the gospel's being preached to the four corners. Well, I think also people are going to start coming back to wanting to get in line with God's feast days. And I think that's why the Sabbath day is actually so important, is because, we go to the menorah for light, for guidance, to understand like why these holidays are even important to begin with. And it's by becoming familiar with these parables and becoming familiar with these feast days, it starts to shine light on things. So depending on what it is you maybe study individually, you might get a totally different illumination when you begin to do this. And I think that's part of what it is about when sharing the fruits of the Spirit. But this also relates back to the parable of the wise and foolish virgins, because what's producing that fire in that candle lampstand is oil. And so we're moving into the season of new oil also. And so that's used for the lamp. And so when we look at this parable, it's talking about lighting the way for the bridegroom, right? So that he can find his way. And so we look at the wise virgins, they didn't have just enough oil for themselves. They also had some in reserve just in case the bridegroom tarried, right? Then there was the 5 foolish virgins that didn't have enough for themselves or any for reserve. So they were trying to bomb reserve off the others. And they're like, well, no, we came prepared. Go and buy some, right? So again, I found that interesting that they make this reference to purchasing something. And some folks think that, the mark of the beast is purely spiritual. And they point this out as a reference to that, which also could be a reference to spinal fluid and things like that occur. All those things seem credible because, Pentecost is one of the feast days where fire appeared on the tops of people's heads and they were understanding tongues and stuff. So these things do seem credible to me in certain contexts. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that. So, Jezebel-Spirit. I quit talking about her. Oh, yeah. Okay. So we're moving into this Abraham Accord now. And so when we went back to in the Jezebel part where it's talking about making an alliance, let me find that. Yeah, where there's a terrible drought. I think it's I lost it. Anyway, there's a certain part in here where there's an alliance made. Let me see if I can find it real quick. There we go. Ahab made a military alliance with Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah. Okay, so this is why I wanted to bring this up real quick. The Israeli-UAE deal, the Abraham Accord, is something that's brewing right now. So this fella here is representative of the UAE, whereas this represents the United States with Mr. Donald Trump. And then we have Benjamin, one of 2 Benjamins that are leading the Israeli government. This is Benjamin Netanyahu, which, by the way, Netanyahu, his name has a meaning. I don't know it off the top of my head, but it's worth looking up. Anyway, Benjamin Gantz is his counterpart. I think his name means something important too. But the two of them cannot come up with a majority government. And so I think that this is kind of a political stunt to give this particular one a little more political clout, just like this one is using here also to give himself some political clout. Oh, I forgot I can share this article. And so anyway, what should be noted about this is that how similar it is going to be to the Jezebel thing. And what it leads to is the destruction of Babylon, right? So when we look at this map here of where Qatar is, we see that it's right here. UAE is right next to Qatar, where they're building these pipelines. And then we got the Georgetown connections with Fauci, of course, here in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. But anyway, I think that some of the references to the destruction of Babylon, yes, people think it might be United States, etc., which is all very well possible, but it's just as likely to be a place like this. But I think the three of them being in an alliance and then still building it could actually become what is known in Daniel as the King of 10 Toes and that sort of thing. So I just wanted to point out that there is a budding alliance here, and that this is the first time that the alliance itself, or any peace accord rather, has borne the name of like Abraham. It's the first one that's had like religious connotations. Now, what should be really emphasized about this is that it's intended to facilitate travel to the Holy Land. So when I was talking about the red heifer earlier, one of the main reasons I brought that up is because the push is to already have pathways for people to travel to the Holy Land. And so if they build this temple, they're going to have red heifer for people to have access to it to become clean to enter the temple, right? And so I really think this qualifies as a possible abomination and desolation and the false peace, as this is happening about 3 years after Revelation 12's 9/23 2017 sign. So the timing of this is just, it's impeccable, really, for this to time up with elections in the United States, of course, but then also the Israelis, I think, are on their 4th or 5th election, which that could be contrived easily, I'm sure, to just kick the can down the road and make it work, right? Perhaps. But either way, the timing of all that's pretty succinct. But anyway, I just wanted to point out the Abraham Accord because that's a relatively new development, and all that I can really say about it right now is that it seems very unilateral and one-sided. It seems like they're basically trying to force this upon the Palestinian folks. I don't think it's well received at all.
I'm sure that's the case because, I mean, if you look at the maps of where Palestine used to be with Israel, it's been completely engulfed and taken over. In fact, there's some maps that don't even show it anymore.
Well, and I don't know. That's also, I really wanted to show this, these energy pipelines and such, because this is really the boundaries people should be looking at when we talk about countries. It really doesn't matter what their actual boundaries are. It matters more about what their economic interests are. So you want to really look at pipelines and things like that and trade routes. And then it starts to really make a lot more sense when you look at what's actually going on, because and have the link up right now. I would highly recommend anybody that finds this interesting to go and listen to Donald Trump's speech about this. He has like a 30-minute speech, maybe, where kind of going around robin around the room, and each of his I don't know what you want to call them, his cabinet members or whatever, they're all making comments on the Abraham Accord, and it's really quite revealing. but what he himself says is the most revealing, in that he says that the energy independence factor has made it so that the United States military presence is no longer needed. And so there's a de-escalation and drawdown of forces now, which all sounds great, right? And it's all this peace talk, right? So it sounds great in a lot of ways, but it also makes it seem like, oh, we were only actually there to protect energy interests. Okay, it seems more clear now, which is what a lot of people have been saying all along. But then, of course, you can prove it with stuff like this, because you got Qatar, Turkey, pipeline. So all these folks here are pushing this competing pipeline. Whereas you look at countries like Iran, like them or not, Iran and Syria are allies. Okay, so they have the right to do business with one another. And so, but this one's also funded by Russia, which is also an ally of Syria and Iran. So what I want to point out here is that there are certain countries in this particular area that are wanted and invited, and then there are certain countries that are not. And the ones that aren't are causing quite a few problems. And so I just think we should really pay attention to this Abraham Accord, because I think that part one of the peace treaty that was rolled out, I think it was around, what was it, February? That really had a lot of these underpinnings in it for what they considered monetary gain, economic stimulus, so on and so forth. But then it was part two we were really waiting for to see what the social ramifications and things were. And that's where they're really trying to facilitate travel to these places, these holy sites. But with COVID in the mix, though, I'm not so sure how that's going to look, because under any other normal circumstances, of course, it might be strict, but it wouldn't include whatever new measures they're going to be introducing. So I think it's almost as if they created the perfect storm for themselves to be able to justify like the most security you can imagine, and then just everybody kind of being okay with it, because, well, I understand, it's the times we live in, right? I hear a lot of people saying that kind of thing. I'm thinking, well, yeah, I know, but do you know what that means? So anyway, that's just a few of the things I wanted to talk about on the tail end of that, because I feel that they are still related. And then as far as that's concerned, the vaccine, if you want to call it that, the way it changes your DNA also, I think that should be kind of related to this possession quality that I think is highlighted by the story of Jezebel, because it's, we adopted the ways of the other gods, that also makes that possession factor heightened, right? It's so I think the mark being in your hand and in your head, and people say, well, that's psychological and your choices and not your actions. Well, it could also be the chip thing, or the vaccine mark or whatever. So I think when the Bible mentions things, there can be layers to it. But the more and more I learn about this generational possession factor, the more I think that the competing rituals and competing feast days and the rituals we see on a world scale, I think that's needed for them to retain control with their gods too. So I think that when you really start to understand this, that's why it should become more important for us to keep the feast days of our God, because that's how his way is preserved. And so we're meant to be the salt of the earth, and preserve the word, preserve the ways of the Lord, not become mixed with Babylon, right? So anyway, that was the lesson on Jezebel I wanted to give out. So don't mix your DNA with the world, in other words. It's one good way of saying it. Because when, Lord comes back, the bridegroom comes back, will he find you in bed with the whore of Babylon, right? That's kind of I hate to keep using that motif, but that's really how the Bible describes it. We're the bride of Christ. And when you look at how these marriage rituals are carried out, because I'm not even married married, so it's pretentious maybe for me to talk about marriage. But when you study it like this, it seems like there was a certain way it was all supposed to play out, and it likens the virgin spirits to those that are staying up, waiting for God, watching and waiting, and So I think this is all kind of related, and that's why I wanted to talk about the Jezebel spirit.
And that's it. That's the end. You're done.
So thank you very much.
Hold on. Did you ever go watch that video from Face Like the Sun on this Moderna company?
Oh yeah, I did actually, and I realized I'd already seen it the one time, but I went ahead and watched it twice. But yeah, go ahead and ask me whatever you was going to say.
When we talked about this and it being the first time that they were going to do this kind of vaccine, I think we should tell people what he talked about. This is Gans Shimura. I think it's Shimura. I could have that wrong how you say his last name. But anyway, Gans from Face Like the Sun. He talks about this company. We talked about it too. We talked about that they've never used this kind of vaccine before. And it's one that modifies with CRISPR editing. They wanted to modify your DNA. And what's really important about this is also that this company has gotten into lots of trouble because of trying to push this mRNA type of vaccine, and yet all of a sudden, this is the company that's first in line to make our vaccine. And they have had multiple legal issues. I don't know if I can't remember because I didn't make the video. Gons made it on Face Like the Sun channel, but he talked about that CEOs stepped down because of how corrupt that company was. Lots of executives stepped down because of how corrupt the company was, how much trouble it was getting into, just for trying to push certain vaccines that they could. Oh, and the efficacy, then the safetiness of it. I mean, don't even know if it works, so we don't know if it's gonna do what it says it's going to do. Probably won't. Probably gonna do something else, which is what they want. But the safety measure, if you got one injection, multiple people had pretty bad responses, but after a second injection, most of them, I think it was something like, I don't know, it was a hefty number, but I think it was more than 50%, had serious systemic side effects. Systemic meaning it could have been hives, or it could have been breathing trouble, or it could have been joint pain, it could have been hair loss, who knows, but it's a systemic thing with effect from two of these. And you know how they do that. They get their first one and then boost it with a second one. With a vaccine that has, with a company that has been in hot water multiple times for trying to push dangerous vaccines. And they're the first ones, frontline, here we go, we're the ones going to do it. And as you said, Fauci was the first CEO of this company, and Fauci is practically Trump's right-hand man still. How come he hasn't been fired?
Oh, yes, all great questions. In fact, the fact that he's a Jesuit should, just be added to the stack. But yeah, and watching that video, I did notice some things about their really talking up their mRNA technology. Now, I thought it was just pure coincidence that their stock quote would be listed on the NASDAQ as mRNA.
Right.
But I don't think it comes of any coincidence whatsoever, because after seeing their website, I realized how much they're really talking up that type of technology. And you're right, it's not tested. In fact, it was only tested as recently as March, and patients that were being paid, which were probably the same people losing their jobs. But
yeah, desperate people.
I think anybody that participates in this will be also participating in the clinical trials, essentially. I mean, when you think about it. So, yeah, I don't trust this at all. And in fact, I was trying to find maybe this is it. There's somewhere where they actually go into it a little more. So yeah, the software of life right here. That's what Gons was showing. So they actually
AKA
explain,
wetware, right?
Yeah, they explain how different they are from RNA and mRNA and DNA, and I mean, they're trying to talk the language of God. So in a sense, they are playing God. This is exactly what I think they were doing in the times of Noah. I mean, even if it was low-tech, high-tech stuff they were pulling off. I mean, like, I think Gary might have mentioned this, how or perhaps even if he didn't, that what the Anunnaki would do is they would pour seed into women sometimes. Due to mechanical incompatibility, they could still produce offspring sometimes by doing certain things. So, I mean, they were doing things maybe just on a low-tech manner even then, I think. But the end result's going to be the same, I think. Again, I'd like to reference that Edgar Cayce prediction where he was talking about the return of all these different spirits. And so, if there's a group of people that anticipating something like that, they would need to, how do we provide them with all, hosts, Oh, well, this could be one way to do it.
Okay, so just like and I'll probably bore you guys by saying it again, but for as many times as I've said it, when they finally come up with just a third strand DNA that they'll lay down, and maybe it'll happen before then, but you'll just immediately lose your morality, you'll lose your conscience, you'll lose, yeah, exactly. I mean, hello, and Trump is getting up behind these companies, which is so frustrating, but I won't get into that.
This is like a badge of dishonor. I mean, look at this. This is like a conspiracy theory. It's worst nightmare.
Yeah. And yet they're the ones that are, we're making the vaccine, everybody just don't worry. And anyway, but I think that third strand DNA, I don't think it'll just be CRISPR technology. I think it'll be an actual full-on new third strand ultimately that you'll get, and that is when you'll lose everything. You'll lose who you are as a God-made human being. You'll be completely controllable, like a superconductor, because it'll have that high conductivity gold that it lays down with. I believe it'll be Orm gold, so that you can have all those superpowers of flying and floating and other things, and it'll cure any disease, but you'll be completely controllable. You'll have absolutely no conscience from God. Oh man,
you just helped me have an epiphany. There are these abilities in maybe it's Buddhism or Hinduism. Hinduism perhaps. I think they're referred to as siddhis. There are actually these abilities that you can obtain, which I've just kind of interpreted as fruits of the Spirit, although they're not ones that are mentioned in Corinthians. They seem to be fruits, nevertheless, of spirits of some kind. So maybe you're right. We could, because a lot of times you see mutations with this type of thing too, or even early on in trials. So regardless of whatever they're saying about their own trials, these aren't peer-reviewed trials even. They're what they're saying about themselves, I think. So, we may not even see the full range of possibilities of editing people's DNA yet. Now, I got some friends that are critics, and they talk about the Monsanto corn even as an example and don't seem to think it's a big deal. So they're saying that evolution occurs daily and that mRNA type vaccines like this are just a specific way to interfere, and that it's not broad enough to make a big deal. But the thing is, though, imagine, well, even if it wasn't for your generation, but maybe what does that mean for your kids and their kids' kids? You see what I mean? That could be something that keeps you from ever having children again. So cutting off your seed.
I'm sure it will have that. So because look at that one that the thalidomide that the women had, like babies without arms and things like that, without legs.
I mean, it could be so bad that you wouldn't want to even take the risk of having a child, because it might be like, if everybody you know is having deformed children and stuff, would you want to take that chance? You see what I mean? So we could be getting in a weird area. I just think people should just, I mean, if you're already self-quarantining and doing everything you can, and you think that there's some truth to this, just don't take it and stay home, But anyway, I wanted to mention something that popped out to me here about this BARDA outfit. It's calling them the Biomedical Advanced Research Authority and Development, but there's a term called BARDO. Have you ever heard of that?
Nope.
Let me show you this real quick, because the BARDO is actually the realm of death.
Of course it is.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the third bardo of meditation. Good. It's meditation.
So since this popped out, I mean, let's just see if this maybe has any kind of relevance here. In some schools of Buddhism, the bardo, or I'm not even going to try the Sanskrit and stuff, as an intermediate transitional or liminal state between death and rebirth. So again, with this picture here, the bardo is actually this space between the head and the foot. It's that in-between space, which the death and resurrection of Christ, by contrast, if he was born here in the belly region, he would then have been died and reborn here between Pisces and Aries. So anyway, let's go back to the bardo here. So that's the bardo. Excuse me. It is the concept which arose soon after Buddha's passing, with a number of earlier Buddhist groups accepting the existence of such an intermediate state. While other schools rejected it, Tibetan Buddhism, bardo is the central theme of the Bardo Thodol, the literal meaning rather, liberation through hearing during the intermediate state. Ooh, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. That is very interesting. Liberation through hearing. Maybe that's why ears ring at that state. So used loosely, bardo is the state of existence intermediate between two lives on earth. According to the Tibetan tradition, after death and before one's next birth, when one's consciousness is not connected with the physical body, one experiences a variety of phenomena. Okay, here's where we get into the siddhi stuff that we were kind of touching on with the mutant stuff. These usually follow a particular sequence of degeneration from just after death, the clearest experiences of reality of which one is spiritually capable, and then proceeding to terrifying hallucinations that arise from the impulses of one's previous unskillful actions. This is represented also in Jung's Red Book, by the way, and remind me to mention something about that. From the prepared and appropriately trained individuals, the bardo often offers a state of great opportunity for liberation, since transcendental insight may arise with the direct experience of reality. For others, it can become a place of danger, as the comically created hallucinations can impel one into a less than desirable rebirth. Oh, wow. Metaphorically, bardo can describe times when our usual way of life is become suspended, as for example during a period of illness or during a period of meditation retreat. Sometimes can prove fruitful for spiritual progress because external constraints diminish. Man, this is very interesting. So it's clearly connected to a very interesting topic, but I think this is probably where we get into like the veils thinning and meeting and becoming aware of that. This also represents something akin to the Rosicrucian cross, which is about internal alchemy, relating to this image here.
Yeah, I was going to say, those look pretty similar.
But anyway, so, you know, we got a company that that it's Barda, but Bardo. So it's not quite the same, I'll admit. There's one letter difference. But that usually denotes a gender thing anyway.
Right.
So I don't see a duh version. This here. Originally, bardo referred only to the period between one life and the next, and this is still a normal meaning when mentioned without any qualification. There was considerable dispute over this theory during the early centuries of Buddhism, one side arguing that rebirth or conception follows immediately after death, and the other saying that there must be an interval between the two. With the rise of Mahayana, a belief in transitional period prevailed. Later, Buddhism expanded the whole concept to distinguish 6 or more similar states covering the whole cycle of life, death, and rebirth. But it can also be interpreted as a transitional experience, any state that lies between two other states, subliminal, sublime. Its original meaning, the experience of being between death and rebirth, is the prototype for the bardo experience, while the 6 traditional bardos show how the essential qualities of that experience are also present in transitional periods. By redefining even further the understanding of the essence of bardo, it can be applied to every moment of existence, the present moment, the now, and the continual bardo, always suspended between the past and the future. So interesting. So, if you ever have any insights on this, just let me know. But I didn't expect to come across that. Glad that we did, though.
That's how I used to do research. I'd look at everything. I'd go down to the bottom, look at all these different things, even in Wikipedia's, and I'd find so many connections, but it kind of starts to get convoluted, and then you get finally just kind of throw up your hands one day and you go, it's all connected. So,
And then the other thing I noticed about this in particular that was a little more obvious, actually, was how it's talking about the Zika thing. And of course, you've heard about the mosquitoes they're planning to
right, in
which
Florida.
is that another Microsoft
Yeah,
brainchild?
that's a Bill Gates thing.
Yeah, there you go. I wasn't even surprised. It's getting kind of predictable at this point. But yeah, so this type of thing here really is unsettling. I mean, they're wanting to hard edit your DNA, because let's just say that we eradicate the coronavirus forever. I mean, we made a permanent alteration to our DNA just for the sake of there being one less cold virus that there are so
Right.
many others of, apparently. You see what I mean? Like, it doesn't even seem practical. If it were trying to combat like a truly virulent, terrible plague type disease, it'd be one thing. But I don't know. I just think there's definitely something more, or they've just been the feint, if you will. And there's something else coming down the pike. Because again, I'll make that one reference to the Resident Evil 5 storyline, where they were combining viruses, one of which, now that the zombie thing's starting to make a lot more sense now that we've read the Barda stuff, that state in between life and death, where it talks about in Revelation where nobody will be able to die. That's kind of interesting. So, but that T virus is the one that kept them from dying, and right, it was supposed to be some type of anti-aging or anti-cancer thing. And then there was the G virus that actually created these mutations. So, but it didn't really do that until it had been exposed to the previous one, and then it built upon that one and caused like all these wild mutations. Well, the character, the villain in this particular installment of the series, she referred to this forced evolution of humanity as the Philosopher's Stone, and that they were going to basically put the entire Earth through an initiation ritual. Which again, if you recall, we've talked about Amrita before, and this particular ritual is one that can be done. See if I can find it real quick. Yeah. All right. So they use 5 meats here, which are representative of the 5 Buddhas, 5 elements, etc. And it's to produce this nectar of the gods, if you will. Now, I want you to also notice how close this sounds to Revelation's mention of the horses, because they have different colors as well. So the 5 nectar needs to be arranged in 4 directions. Yellow excrement in the east, green bone marrow in the north, white semen in the west, and red blood in the south. Blue urine is placed in the center. 4 nectar should come from the wise monks, and the ova should be collected from the first menstruation of a blessed woman. This is a Buddhist ritual.
Sounds like the Moonchild ceremony.
That's what yeah. So that's what I'm saying. Like, you don't know what you're putting in your body with this vaccine. If they're doing this to you, we're gonna read here about what this does. So
Anyway, the 5 meats are arranged similarly. It's comparing this to another ritual. Meat of a black bull in the southeast, meat of a blue dog in the southwest, meat of the white elephant in the northwest, and the meat of the green horse, pale horse, chloros, in the northeast. That one's the one I found most interesting. The meat of the red human corpse at the center. After the ceremony, these ingredients will transform into one taste, ikasara, elixir, which bestows bliss, vitality, immortality, and wisdom, much like the philosopher's stone, the pineal gland.
The ascension of the Hermetic alchemy.
Which is what they get when they drink blood of kids, especially, because kids are guaranteed to have a pineal gland, whereas adults, you don't know if they do or not. Actual modern practitioner will take a synthesized, oh my goodness. Actual modern practitioner will take a synthesized essence of the nectar pill and combine it with black tea or alcohol, but mostly the nectar pill are derived from plants. So there might be some alternative to this, but we can see that here clearly the, meats. But so there's, and of course, what are the zombies known for? Walking around consuming flesh.
Yeah.
So, I'm not trying to say that that's going to happen, but it's just a little unnervingly similar to things like the bardo being in between state. And
the hive mind and the superconductivity with a third strand DNA and control.
It's just, I don't know, man. Thought I should mention it just to be sure. But yeah, this is often a motif we see, like, soma, drink of the gods, food of the gods, eat of my body, drink of my, even Christ does this ritual with the communion too. So we can see that there's definitely some truth in hardline facts in there embedded with, has something to do. There's a mystery here, and I think that the revelation of Jesus Christ has something to do with that too, but we can see clearly that there's some competing spirits or competing rituals, because if somebody goes through this type of ritual and then they're also following, I don't know how many other religions, they could be just inhabiting themselves with demons, if you will. If you think about it that way, these could become portals for possession to occur.
Oh, absolutely.
Potentially.
I think that it's just like somebody was talking about Sodom and Gomorrah and sodomy. I said that actually introduces a spirit that will attach to the base of the brainstem, just like the Kundalini, just like it, that comes up through the spine. This is definitely.
Well, see, this is why it's so important to be in line with the Lord's days and His ways, because then, let's say that this Kundalini thing happens naturally at some point when God ordains it, right? If you need to be in line with God's ways so that you're in His spirit, right? Well, if you're doing this stuff and you're just what happened to us in the garden, right? If it happens, it was introduced to Adam and Eve before they were ready, right? And so it can create a lot of sin too. It can become inhabited by spirits that are not the Holy Spirit. This is a very interesting concept. So I don't know, maybe we should dive in at some point and really start to try and pick apart this vaccine, because I've done some research on how the virus and stuff itself is structured, and I'd like to see how that compares with this and what the aims of this really are. Of course, I'm sure they're not going to disclose everything, but as you mentioned with some of the side effects, for instance, some of those, the one most common was just site injection pain, which is pretty obvious, but some of the hives and things like that. This type of technology has a long track record of not being well received too. If I recall that video Gons did, and they was talking about the company just rushing through clinical trials.
Exactly.
They don't really have any regard for the safety or the efficacy of the. Well, I guess they do have a regard for the efficacy, because that they'll fire people, quickly and for little cause. But I guess when you got the stakes that high, it is pretty important. But when he was doing the story, I couldn't help but get the sense of urgency that Moderna seemed to have.
Right.
See what I mean? It was almost as if they didn't really want to rush it. It's like they had to rush it. There was a need to meet a deadline of some sort. So I almost think that when you really start to think about it that way, because it talks about how the Satan comes with great wrath, for he knows the time is short. If they are expecting their master any day now, or soon, it's like that episode we saw in Supernatural the last time, where he summoned that spirit that came and talked to him, the guy that was head of the farm. What was it? Some type of pharmacy corporation. Be producing vaccine or whatever. He summoned that guy out of a cup of blood, and was like, "Oh, we're hurrying, we're trying to get it done fast." And the response he gets seems to suggest that like he could be replaced.
Yeah.
Pretty easily. So it makes you wonder. Not to say that Anthony Fauci is that guy by any stretch of the imagination, but the parallels are there. And of course, that was in 2009, so it makes you wonder how long this has been in the works. But thank you for allowing me to incorporate.
Yeah, I think Friday would be a good day unless that's too soon. But if we can get some research on this company by Friday, that we could cover it then, or whatever you think.
I'd really like to delve into it before, because it's becoming so relevant with people having children going back to school and stuff. I think we should try and explore it together, so people can get educated on it at the best of their ability.
I'd be happy to do some research this week for Friday on that. And with that, we had someone in the chat that expressed frustration, anger, and saying that he doesn't care about people anymore. And I don't know if he himself is hungry, starving for food, or if he's starving spiritually. His name's Jeffrey, and I don't think he's in the chat anymore, but if you want to pray, you can, or I can pray, but I want to make sure we cover him in the prayer today.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't notice the chat.
It was a while back. He comes and he goes, and I've really tried to get him to accept the friendship this community has to offer, and to join us either in the Discord or to email me to talk to us. But he hasn't done that. So that's kind of my hope, is he'll accept what this community has to offer, because when I feel like he feels, I tell people, I went on Mike's channel, Born Saint. I told him, I asked him to pray for me, and I go to my Discord channel and I ask you guys in the Discord to pray for me. And I think he's kind of isolating and running away from it. I hate to say it that way. But.
Sorry, all my chat wasn't there, and it just finally loaded, so I didn't even notice. But yes, I'll pray for him, and if you need something, you can reach out to me.
That's what. If it's actual physical hunger, I'd be happy to. I have more food in my garden than I'll ever be able to eat. We could all throw in some ramen or something. I don't know. I'm not sure if it's physical hunger or not. He didn't say.
But yeah, and then as these times approach here with these holidays, I wanted to start. There's especially the Feast of Atonement. I think it was September 18th that you're not supposed to work and stuff like that, and so that's a day where it's during the week. It's not a normal Saturday or Sunday like most people would normally have a day of rest, and it says you're not supposed to work that day, etc. So as we approach some of these dates, I want to focus on the actual holy days themselves and talk about them a little more, because I noticed there's a lot of other channels covering this really well, and I think that we could talk about it a little bit and explain why it might be important, or why it is important rather.
Well, and if it's helpful, I would love to do that. Especially, that's why you said when you feel that way, you focus on the feast days.
Yeah, anytime I feel like I don't really know what I should be doing, you go back to the lamp and go get some more oil, and then take it back out into the world and just teach people the ways. And so I think that's why I like to focus so much on the parables and the feast days, and just because we're to learn the seasons, and these 7 candlesticks are to help us learn the seasons. Because I think that when these certain prophecies are fulfilled, I think they're done on certain days, and certain times. And if we're familiar with those times, we can kind of predict it almost, kind of familiar with the times, as it were. And so another thing that occurred to me was, it says Jesus comes as a thief in the night, right? So it made me realize when these priests go out and blow the horns, that's at the first sliver of the moon, not when the moon's full. It's when there's a sliver. Well, if you're a thief, when would you come?
Yeah.
When it's the darkest, right? So like the night right before the new month. So I think that when we really start to realize things like that, like, whoa, wow, maybe it's at the beginning of this certain holiday. Well, which one would that be? Well, atonement's one that folks think is a really good candidate for stuff like that. So, because we see with Passover, there was these cycles that repeated, with the passing of the angel of death, etc. Man, I won't go on ever long. I just wanted to highlight a couple of those things. So, except that we see this coronavirus thing and the vaccine as maybe another parallel to the Passover. So, if you really view this in the context of Passover, because that's kind of when it began, also, just take that into consideration. You need to have the lamb's blood saving you, not some Amrita ritual vaccine thing, mummia.
Oh yeah. Yuck. Yuck. Luckily, I don't think any of us would be remotely close to that. We have a
I know
pretty
I'm preaching to the
strong
choir,
community
but
here.
still, this gives you ways to explain it to other people in a way that maybe that's the seed that might be what wakes them up. For me, it was watching that documentary a long time ago called Loose Change about 9/11. Like that. Sometimes it's just one thing that wakes somebody up.
That's true. Because there's still souls to be saved. That's why Jesus hasn't come back yet. So does that mean you were willing to say the prayer, or would you like me to pray? How would you like to do that?
I prefer the host to do it.
Oh, okay. All right, everybody, let's pray. Let's close our eyes if you can and bow your heads if you can. Jesus, we love you first. We want to come together to know you first. We pray, Lord, that this knowledge brings us closer together with you and us, our relationship. And we want, as we get to know you better, we want to be able to show other people what that looks like. We want to show people that the kingdom of heaven is now and not wait on the other side. And when we're frustrated or scared or worried or hungry, we pray, Lord, that you would bring. We know that you promised that you would fulfill those concerns, those fears, that hunger, that thirst, with just yourself. That you are all we need. And so we pray specifically for Jeff, or anyone else that feels the way Jeffrey feels. I know I have. When we're frustrated, we're tired, we're scared, we're worried, we're hungry, we're thirsty, we feel like we're missing something, and we choose worldly things to help us instead of you, Jesus. I pray that we would drop those worldly things and fall to our knees and pray to you and look to the Word and ask for help. Come together, ask for prayer. I pray for anyone, Lord, put your peace and love over them right now if they're suffering in this way, so that they would know that they are taken care of, just like the birds are taken care of, and they have no need to store anything away. Let us be prepared, not scared, and let us help each other in these end times, protecting the remnant, checking each other, but coming together in love and peace. Give us our purpose together. Show us what we need to do to live out what you want us to do while we're still here. We know there's still souls to be saved. Help us work hard to find them. And we pray, Jesus, always in your holy, holy name, Yeshua HaMashiach of Nazareth. Amen.
Amen. Fishers of men. Meow meow.
Yes, that's right. And you guys, if you think of it, you can pray for me, because I feel that way. I get worried, I get nervous, I get scared, all those things. And I want to watch my kids grow up with ease. I admit, I want it to be easy. Why can't it be easier? But it's not going to be, and it never was meant to be, and I kind of always knew that. So we just, if you think of it, pray for me, because I feel that way often.
But that's the whole point, is the salvation is found in finding God's ways. That's why he wants us to preserve His word. So I think that salvation is given to those in the end when the time of the remnant occurs. That's why His intervention is made, is to preserve His remnant. So just remember, the prophecies are there to give us hope, not to add to the fear. There's plenty of that already.
Right.
There would be no point in having prophecies if they were supposed to generate fear.
All right. Well, the next Friday it will be Moderna Research Night, and
yeah. So anybody on the Discords, help us do some crowdsourcing on the research, and even if it's about like the who's who, or whatever it is,
Yeah, that's what the Discord was really intended for, if anyone didn't know. My intention was that we would come together and you could research with me. Because, by the way, I don't really want to do it alone. It's a lot of work. So we invite anyone to do any research on this with us.
Particularly if they have like a medical background, you see what I mean? Because if the body of Christ as such is supposed to be that we all share our talents and interests with one another to help illuminate things like this. So I'd encourage anybody that understands this stuff on a technical way to also contribute, because then it helps us with critics, especially when they want to say, oh, they want to throw science in your face.
Science. By the way, one last thing I'm gonna say, and then I'll let you go. I'm reading a book called The Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship. I really highly recommend it. Especially because if anyone could help me, these guys' vocabulary is out of this world. I mean, they use $10 million words that is just amazing. But it's called The Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship, and it's amazing. I'm only 30 pages in, and I've just been highlighting and quoting some of this stuff. They talk about the hijacking of science for the goal of teaching basically anything but God and Jesus, and how computers are the golem of today, and it just gets into so much of what the elite are doing in the name of the common good. He even quotes Ravi Zacharias. There's two brothers, I think. They even quote Ravi Zacharias in here. Rest his soul, bless him. And just gets into a lot of predictive programming, understanding, and definitely they're Christian. They quote scripture when they try to go against us. So speaking of science, The Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship is a great book to look at that will explain to you that science is really all bullshit, and that all of these, I know I haven't sworn in a long time. Oh my gosh, I'm going to have to put a silver dime in the silver jar for my kids. It's been so long since I've said a swear
Maybe it
word.
was righteous indignation.
I hope so, because it frustrated me. Well, forgive me, Jesus, I repent from that, and help me to turn away from all curse words, but it frustrates me because I loved science fiction, and I'm learning. I used to think, wow, how did these guys call it? These guys knew what was coming. It's because it was predictive programming. They wrote that stuff on purpose to push and usher this into our lives in the future. They didn't guess. They didn't see it coming. They knew it was coming, and they were pushed to write those books. And so all the science fiction, these people, they're all, yeah, it was all for the same goal of corrupting our science and making us all confused as to real science. And again, why do people look at me like I'm a total nut job when I tell them I think space is fake, but yet we just are so ingrained to believe in all science?
Well, and that's another reason why I like to talk about the Jezebel spirit, because it's almost like, which spirit are we wedding ourselves to, and you look at all these different rituals and things that go along with all these things, and it's almost as if you're choosing to marry the world like that, this science would be the religion. So in the Jezebel, state, it's like science would be the Baal in this context, you see. Except instead, our agriculture is like, oh, we can cloud seed and control the weather and control all the things, but then it really just leads to catastrophe, just like
right. So I didn't mean to go off on a tangent, but it's a great book, and it certainly tells a lot, and I'm only 30 pages into it. So with that, we'll just do the Moderna research for Friday. Again, people can help out by going to the Discord channel, which I dropped a link for, and giving us some ideas on where to look. Anything else you want to close out with?
No, ma'am. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, have a good evening. Peace and love of the Lord, everybody.
am not of this world that we live in. That makes me an alien. Alienated. That makes me an alien. Alienated. That makes me an alien. I am not of this world that we live in. That makes me an alien. Alienated. That makes me an alien. Alienated. That makes me an alien. I am not of this world. When they see me coming, most people turn around and start to running because they find it strange. I speak another language because I was abducted by the God that changes the old man into a new creature. Don't mess with men in black because they try to heat you with this thing called temptation. Have you go into a world called damnation. And on this earth there's a lot of us. I am not alone. Bunch of ETs waiting on the phone home. And when the call's answered, we gone in the rapture. Warp speed faster than the Enterprise can catch us. Don't call no Will Smith. He cannot save the day. Jesus set me free. Independence Day. And if you want to know which world I come from, it's not on the map, but it's near the sun. I am not of this world that we live in. That makes me an alien. Alienated. That makes me an alien. Alienated. That makes me an alien. I am not of this world that we live in. That makes me an alien. Alienated. That makes me an alien. Alienated. That makes me an alien.
I'm a foreigner, a visitor, a stranger to this earth. I made my journey here by the way of second birth. Not through the womb, but by his spirit and his grace. Transform me from within because I'm from another place. Metamorphosis, mutations, he made modifications. He changed me from within and created alterations. Emerged and reborn my human form as an illusion. The only thing close to proof of evolution. This body will decay, I'm a temporary resident. My soul is eternal, separated from the elements. I've mutated, I'm a stranger, I'm a new man. A traveler and a tourist to this crazy land. You cross a path with some creatures from another place. And if you ask us how we got here, we will say by grace. We're not the type you think that fly around in spaceships. We follow Christ and unlike them we really exist.
I am not of this world that we live in. That makes me an alien. Alienated. That makes me an alien. Alienated. That makes me an alien. I am not of this world that we live in. That makes me an alien. Alienated. That makes me an alien. Alienated. That makes me an alien.